Look around any coffee shop, any office, or even just at the people commuting on a Tuesday morning. What do you see? You see exhaustion. Not just the kind of tired that comes from a hard day of physical labor, but a deep, hollow depletion, brain fog, emotional numbness, people staring at screens, running on their third energy drink, just trying to make it to the weekend. We treat this as a psychological failing, or maybe just the unavoidable tax of modern life. But what if we have this entirely wrong? What if the global burnout epidemic isn't a mindset issue at all, but a literal energy crisis happening on a microscopic level?
That is exactly the paradigm shift we urgently need. We have spent decades treating burnout as a purely emotional or psychological phenomenon. We tell people to take a vacation, to meditate, to practice mindfulness. And while those things have value, they completely miss the biological root of the problem. What we are actually looking at is a bioenergetic collapse. Deep inside almost every cell in the human body are tiny biological engines called mitochondria. When those engines begin to flicker and fail, the entire organism suffers.
It is fascinating to think about exhaustion not as a lack of willpower, but as a mechanical failure of our cellular engines. Let's dive right into that. For anyone who hasn't thought about mitochondria since high school biology, how do these structures actually dictate whether we wake up feeling vibrant or feeling like we are dragging ourselves through wet cement?
It all comes down to a molecule called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. You can think of ATP as the universal energy currency of human biology. Your body does not run directly on the food you eat or the coffee you drink. Every single thing you do has to be paid for with ATP. When your heart beats, it costs ATP. When you regulate a frustrating emotion during a stressful meeting, it costs ATP. When your immune system fights off a virus or your brain forms a new memory, it all requires this cellular currency. Mitochondria are the microscopic power plants responsible for converting oxygen and nutrients into that ATP.
So, to use an economic metaphor, if ATP is the currency, our mitochondria are the mint. And right now, modern humanity is experiencing massive hyperinflation and a collapsing economy. We are spending energy we simply do not have.
That is a brilliant way to put it. Every physiological process requires an energetic investment. When the demand for energy consistently exceeds your mitochondria's capacity to produce and recover it, the organism begins accumulating metabolic debt. You don't just stop functioning immediately because the human body is incredibly resilient. Instead, you shift into emergency physiology. You start running on stress hormones. Adrenaline and cortisol step in to keep you moving, but running on emergency power has a massive biological cost. That is when true burnout emerges.
I want to linger on that concept of emergency physiology because I think it describes how millions of people are living right this second. We have essentially normalized living in a state of biological overdraft. And what is our favorite way to deal with that overdraft? Stimulants. We live in a culture that absolutely worships the hustle, fueled by endless cups of coffee, pre-workout powders, and energy drinks. But there is a very dark irony here, isn't there? We are confusing stimulation with actual, sustainable energy.
It is one of the most profound mistakes we make regarding our health. Stimulation is not energy. When you consume caffeine, you are not giving your mitochondria fuel to produce more ATP. Instead, caffeine works primarily by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain. Adenosine is the molecule that builds up throughout the day to tell your brain that you are tired and need to sleep. Caffeine acts like a piece of tape placed over the check engine light on your car's dashboard. The engine is still failing, the oil is still dry, but you just can't see the warning light anymore.
That is a terrifying image, honestly. We are putting tape over the check engine light and then pressing the gas pedal all the way to the floor. We are overriding our own biological safety signals.
Exactly. And the nervous system becomes chemically activated, you feel wired and alert, but underneath that artificial buzz, your cellular recovery continues to deteriorate. You are masking energetic bankruptcy rather than solving it. And when the stimulant wears off, the crash isn't just a return to baseline, it is a drop into an even deeper deficit, because while you are artificially stimulated, you spent even more ATP that you couldn't afford to lose.
This brings up a really profound philosophical question about modern civilization. We have built an entire society, our work hours, our lighting, our digital expectations, around ignoring our biological limits. We are sacrificing our foundational cellular health just to meet quarterly targets or to scroll through infinite content late at night. The environment we have constructed is fundamentally hostile to the very engines that keep us alive.
It truly is. If you look at the factors that destroy mitochondrial efficiency, it reads like a checklist of modern life. Chronic psychological stress, ultra-processed nutrition, sedentary behavior, environmental toxins, and perhaps most destructively, the disruption of our circadian rhythms.
Let's unpack that circadian connection, because I think people understand that poor sleep makes them tired, but they might not realize that light and timing actually directly impact how their cells generate power. Our cells actually know what time it is.
They absolutely do. Mitochondria operate rhythmically. They are deeply synchronized with the 2-4-hour sleep-wake cycle. The timing of your light exposure, the timing of your meals, and the timing of your sleep dictate how well these cellular engines function. During the day, mitochondria are optimized for energy production. At night, they shift into repair and cleanup modes. When you stare at bright, artificial blue light at midnight, you are sending a biological signal to your mitochondria that it is high noon. You completely destroy their temporal alignment.
So we are essentially giving our cells jet lag without ever leaving our living rooms. We are scrambling the software that runs the power grid.
Precisely. And when the mitochondria are confused about what time it is, they become highly inefficient. They produce less ATP, and crucially, they start producing more metabolic exhaust. This brings us to a very important concept called oxidative stress.
I have heard that term thrown around in the wellness space, usually to sell antioxidant supplements. But what is oxidative stress actually doing inside the cell? Is it like biological rust?
Biological rust is the perfect analogy. When mitochondria generate ATP, it is a volatile chemical process. It naturally produces byproducts called reactive oxygen species, or free radicals. In a healthy, well-rested system, the body has endogenous antioxidant defense systems that neutralize these byproducts instantly. It is like having a highly efficient exhaust system on a car. But when you are chronically stressed, sleep-deprived, and running on emergency physiology, that exhaust system fails. The free radicals start bouncing around inside the cell, damaging the mitochondria themselves, damaging the cellular membrane, and even damaging your DNA.
So the very act of producing energy, if done inefficiently, starts to destroy the machinery that makes the energy. It is a vicious downward spiral. The more exhausted you are, the harder you push, the more oxidative rust you accumulate, and the less capable you are of producing energy tomorrow.
That is the exact mechanism of deep clinical burnout. It is oxidative overload inside the cell. The mitochondria literally shrink, they become fragmented, and they die off. Your organs, your brain, and your nervous system simply do not have the power supply required to maintain a baseline of joy, motivation, or physical vitality. You become emotionally numb and cognitively foggy because your brain is rationing its limited ATP just to keep your vital organs functioning.
It is incredibly sobering to realize that our emotional state, our capacity to feel joy, to be patient with our families, to feel inspired by our work, is entirely downstream of this microscopic chemical equation. We tend to judge ourselves so harshly when we feel burnt out. We think we are weak, but the reality is our biology is just doing the math. And the math says we are out of funds.
I always tell people to drop the moral judgment around fatigue. Your body is incredibly intelligent. Burnout is not a failure of your character. It is a highly conserved survival mechanism. Your cells are shutting down non-essential functions to protect you from catastrophic oxidative damage. The fatigue is a protective shield.
That is a beautiful reframe. The fatigue is a protective shield. But obviously, we don't want to live behind that shield forever. We want to actually fix the power grid. And the encouraging reality here is that mitochondria are not static. They are highly dynamic, adaptive structures, right? We can rebuild them.
Yes, and this is where the science becomes incredibly hopeful. Mitochondria are constantly undergoing processes of fusion, fission, and biogenesis. Biogenesis means the creation of entirely new, highly efficient mitochondria. And the way we trigger biogenesis is through something called hormesis.
Hormesis. The idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but applied on a cellular level. Short, acute bursts of stress that trigger a positive adaptation.
Exactly. Modern life gives us chronic, low-grade stress that slowly rusts us out. What the mitochondria actually crave is acute, intense stress followed by profound recovery. The most powerful trigger for mitochondrial biogenesis is physical movement. High-intensity interval training, heavy resistance training, and steady-state cardiovascular work all force the cells to realize they need more energy capacity. In response, they build more mitochondria.
So exercise isn't just about burning calories or building muscle. It is literally communicating with your cellular infrastructure, telling it to expand the power plant. What else triggers this? I imagine temperature plays a role.
Temperature is a massive lever. Deliberate cold exposure, like ice baths or cold showers, forces the body to generate heat, which dramatically upregulates mitochondrial function, particularly in brown fat. On the other end of the spectrum, heat exposure through saunas activates heat shock proteins that repair damaged cellular structures. But I must emphasize, all of these acute stressors only work if you have the other side of the equation dialed in: profound recovery.
Right, because if you are already in a state of severe metabolic debt, jumping into a freezing ice bath or doing a brutal workout might just push you further into bankruptcy. You have to have the raw materials to rebuild.
Precisely. You cannot outtrain a shattered circadian rhythm. Rebuilding the mitochondrial network starts with the absolute basics. Viewing natural sunlight in the early morning to set the cellular clocks. Prioritizing deep, uninterrupted sleep, which is when the brain literally flushes out metabolic waste. Eating nutrient-dense foods that provide the specific vitamins and minerals like magnesium, B vitamins, and CoQ10 that the mitochondria use in the electron transport chain.
It sounds so simple, yet it is profoundly difficult to execute in a society that constantly pulls us away from these natural rhythms. It feels like we are on the verge of a major shift in how we approach human performance in medicine. We are moving away from just treating symptoms, giving a pill for a headache, a stimulant for fatigue, and moving toward what we might call energy intelligence.
The future of medicine will undoubtedly be bioenergetic. We are already seeing the early stages of this with wearable technology. People are tracking their heart rate variability, their sleep architecture, their continuous glucose levels. But the data itself isn't the cure. Wearables don't improve health, interpretation does. The future lies in using AI and continuous monitoring to understand exactly how your unique lifestyle choices are impacting your cellular energy production in real time.
Imagine a world where your health dashboard doesn't just tell you that you slept poorly, but actually maps out your mitochondrial efficiency. A world where we treat energy production as the absolute foundation of human resilience. Because without cellular energy, literally nothing else functions optimally. Not our immune systems, not our mental health, not our society.
That is the ultimate truth. Energy is the foundation of life. When we restore the ancient cellular intelligence designed to sustain us, we don't just eliminate burnout. We unlock a level of human vitality, creativity, and connection that most people have never truly experienced. We stop surviving, and we start generating life.
We stop surviving, and we start generating life. I cannot think of a more powerful thought to leave on. Perhaps burnout was never simply emotional exhaustion. Perhaps it was millions of microscopic engines inside of us, quietly crying out for recovery. And perhaps true vitality doesn't come from forcing the body to push harder, but from finally listening to it.
It requires us to respect the biological machinery that makes our consciousness possible.
A profound shift in perspective. The power is literally inside our cells, waiting to be reignited.